Greetings! Welcome to Featurette 8 for Hot Dogs, Horseshoes, and Hand Grenades 2. I'm Anton, Game Director, and today we are talking about attachments. As most of you know, H3 has always been a gun customization game, and that's never been more true in our sequel. So what have we got for you this week? We're going to start with how you put attachments onto objects and take them off, which can be a little bit different in this second game. Then we'll talk about our new universal object settings menu that you can use to link to attachments. We'll start with the specific attachment coverage with iron sights and then reflex sights. Then we'll talk about scopes, both how they work and some of the new quality of life features that we have for them. We'll go over bayonets, which are actually excellent in this game, unlike the first. Then we'll go over decorative attachments, which are a bit less of a pain now to put a ton of on a gun. And finally, the largest topic, muzzle devices, which are more complex and varied in H3VR2. So let's dive in. So how do attachments work in H3VR2? Let's start with placement. Attachments on rails are now correctly indexed by the rail slots. Those slots can be regular, like a 1913 rail, or arbitrary, like this older Weaver type rail for the 1022 that has them in different places. When it comes to interacting with and detaching attachments, we've changed the control scheme to prevent a common problem that the first game had, which is that where you would have, say, the fore of a rifle, and you would put a bunch of stuff on it. When you would go to grab it, especially in the in the thick of fighting, you could end up being like, I wanted to grab the front of it, but I accidentally grabbed this weird decoration I put on, or I wanted to grab the foregrip and I accidentally grabbed the laser. And so we have changed how this works. Now, to select an attachment that is affixed to a gun, you just use the grab ray, which is by pressing B or Y. You aim that grab ray at the specific attachment and then press one of your grab buttons on the controller, either the grip button or the trigger. This ensures that in a tense combat situation, you're always grabbing exactly what you want 100% reliably. So how do you configure attachments in H3VR2? Well, that grab ray we use to grab objects at a distance into our hand or to select various attachments to grab has another cool feature. If we have our wrist menu open, we can link a menu in it to any configurable object, most of which are attachments, but there'll be other configurable objects in the game. While we're at it, let's take a look at another cool thing the wrist menu can now do, which is that while it's open, you can press the AX button on the controller that it's open on, and will actually detach the wrist menu out into space. So you can use both of your hands, configuring, moving objects around, organizing things, or say, pressing buttons on the menu with one hand and selecting objects with the other. Any object in the game can define a set of things that are configurable about it. Numerical settings, textures, colors, behaviors, and they all communicate with this single unified menu instead of, H3.1's approach, which is 18 different menus that all work differently. A lot cleaner and more consistent in this game. Let's talk about sights in H3VR2, starting with irons. Iron sights are pretty much what you'd expect. You have front sights, you have rear sights, pairs of them, and we now, like everything else in H3VR2, have some just like beautiful, wonderful little hand animations for flicking and manipulating the various components on them. Reflex sights are more complex. For those of you who don't know, our reflex sights are as realistic as they can get. Reticles are projected correctly at distance in space. They have accurately sized and dimensioned reticles and some rendering sugar that makes holographic sights look really great. We use a custom distance field rendering technique for these that it basically ensures that the reticle always is really high clarity no matter what resolution that the screen is drawing at. So even if you're on, say, PC VR and you're using like a Generation 1 VR headset with a much lower resolution, the reticle should always be sufficient thickness to make sure that they have high, clarity and visibility. So what about scopes in H3VR2? Just like our reflex sights, we have the most accurate and detailed scope sim in games. The whole system is data-driven, which gives you completely accurate field of view, reticle dimensions, eye relief, and eye box behavior. That's the desired distance that specific optic setup wants your eye to be from it. We model the real-life differences between first and second focal plane reticles, for those of you who are into that nuance. The image is projected correctly, which means you can actually two-eye aim, where one eye is looking through the scope and the other is looking at distance at your target, just like you would in real life. And to pair that with our realistic eye box sim, which was a bit of a pain in H3VR1 due to how the virtual stock worked, we now have a more adaptive system for the virtual stock, wherein basically the system knows that you're trying to aim down a specific optic, knows what the ideal eye relief for that optic is, and within a sensible clamped range for it, moves the rifle into the correct distance for it, which is like so important for certain types of fixed magnification scopes and antique scopes that would actually always want that scope to be like an inch from your eye. And so that all works nice, automatically, correctly, and cleanly in with our new dynamic shouldering system. Bayonets in H3VR2 actually rock. They never worked well in our last game, just because they were sort of patched in over the melee system. But because our stabbing and cutting systems are significantly more robust this time around, it means bayonets are actually great too. Bayonets function exactly the same way any standalone melee weapon does, but can be affixed just like you'd think. And because our system now differentiates between pure thrusting weapons and thrusting weapons with an edge on them, you'll get different behavior for bayonets that are more traditionally knife-like, where you could sort of stab in and then tear out with the blade, versus ones like the old Mosin bayonet that is just a stabbing implement. It's more of a skewering device. Decorative attachments are back in H3VR2. All the goofy stuff for sure. I mainly want to call out a category of them that never really worked before, even though I put them in the game, which is stuff like rail covers. As I mentioned earlier, involving our quality of life improvements, decorations that overlap critical interactions now in H3VR2 aren't a problem, because when you go to grab them with just your standard grab buttons, it's always going to grab the primary interaction that is present, because you laser grab things as specific as the rail covers. So that just means that you can just festoon your gun with as much junk as you want, and it is not going to get in the way of you interacting with it in a combat context. And if you like sticking tons of dumb things on your gun, we've got a bunch of new stuff planned, like these cute little gun charms. Let's talk about muzzle devices in H3VR2. This is our most complex type of attachment and the domain of things that have gotten the biggest changes compared to the first game. In the first game, muzzle devices were just all sort of completely generic and completely universal, and that meant that there was very little differentiating them, just other than how the model looked for the most part, and maybe a couple internal accuracy parameters. Not anymore. There's three types of pieces of information about any muzzle attachment that are important now. There is the thread type, the bore diameter, and whether or not it, in rare cases, is a low pressure only type of muzzle device. So for thread types, in real life, can be a lot of them. We have condensed that down to 5, sort of small to large, and many of the muzzle devices have been modeled specifically to have back ends for a bunch of those different types. It's basically, it's on a case-by-case basis how much this modularity makes sense for that specific muzzle device. There's then bore size, and bore size is literally how large of an aperture is it, and there's some cool behaviors if you get this wrong. If the bore size for the muzzle attachment is larger than the round you're sending through it, you're probably just going to get some small amount of decreased performance. In real life, say a suppressor can have a significantly larger bore than the round going through it, and it's not quite as effective, but it still works. If it's, on the other hand, if it's the opposite, and you have put an attachment with too small of a bore on it for the round coming through, it's just gonna boop, pop right off the front of the gun when you fire it, quite comically. In real life, it would probably explode or get damaged or what have you, but because we're not modeling like full gun damage, destruction, or anything, in this case, it's just going to bloop onto the ground and make you feel like a dum-dum. So what kind of other muzzle devices are there in H3VR2? Let's start simple. There are flash hiders that are mostly just about aesthetic function. You can see the difference here with one gun where we have a flash hider on it, and then another copy of that gun that just has a thread protector. You get a different intensity and shape of muzzle flare on it. If you instead put on a muzzle brake, muzzle brakes and compensators work by redirecting propellant gases, which reduces felt recoil. They also tend to make the muzzle flash more prominent and make the gunshot significantly louder for the shooter. And then, of course, suppressors. We have some that screw on the long way and some that are QD, known as quick detach. They just pop right on, very, very short turn of the dial to affix them. Just like in real life, suppressors dampen the sound of firing, they give you a very slight velocity bump, and they add some amount of point of aim shift, which is going to vary based upon the sort of quality of suppressor, and probably to a certain degree how correct the bore diameter is for it. This also increases dwell time, which is like part of the cycling process on automatic guns. Certain suppressors are also only made for low pressure rounds, as I mentioned earlier. Most commonly, these are like 22 LR suppressors that are just like very narrow and made of aluminum. If you try to use one of these suppressors for ammunition that it's not rated for, like standard 5.56 from this M4, the suppressor will unwind itself progressively and fly off the barrel. Whoops. Putting it all together, H3VR2 has an attachment system that is more robust, flexible, nuanced, and realistic than anything we've built before. You might have noticed there are a couple categories of attachments we didn't talk about, foregrips, lasers, and things like that, and that's because those systems are still under development, and I want to make sure they're exactly what we want them to be before I show them to you folks. So don't worry about that. And there are a couple types that probably won't make it into the game for its initial release, but will get slowly added into the game over the post-release phase. That'll be stuff like underbarrel weapons and such. So yeah, so stay tuned if you're interested in attachment stuff. I assure you there'll be more to see in the future. Anywho, that just about does it for Featurette 8. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure to follow us on our H3VR2 socials for the very latest news and meme videos, and make sure to like, subscribe, and wishlist the game. And I hope you all have yourselves a wonderful rest of your week. See you soon. Peace.